I invested in two Shark Tank startups alongside Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary. Now, one of those startups could hit a $1 billion valuation in the near future, and the other just filed for bankruptcy. Hey there, my name's Chris Graby. I love investing in startups, and I love teaching everyday investors how they can invest in startups as well. So this is how I decided to invest in two Shark Tank startups. The first one had already aired on Shark Tank, and Cuban had already invested in them. The second one, I actually didn't know they were going to be on Shark Tank. Now, there were rumors that they might air or might potentially be on the tank at some point, but due to legal obligations, I wasn't actually allowed to know. Obviously, they aired, and Mr. Wonderful struck a deal with this startup. Now, both of these startups were in a very similar place. They had gained some traction, but still had a very long way to go. One was an up-and-coming alcohol brand, and their name was Beatbox Beverage, and the other was focused on a new twist on office products, and their name was MC Squares. One of the things that stood out to me when both of these startups came my way was the founders. Both of these companies had founders that I believed in and that I wanted to invest in. But trying to disrupt an industry, especially the alcohol industry or even the office supply industry, it can be virtually impossible. A massive major hill that you have to climb and a lot of obstacles that you're gonna have to overcome. But it was clear both of these companies and these founders, they had grit to find a way to figure things out and to bring a potential return on my investment. That is why I invested in them. So let's dive into what I learned from investing in these two Shark Tank startups. Both of them were gaining significant traction when I invested in them. The demand for their product was growing quite nicely, even well after they had aired on Shark Tank. You hear all these stories of the Shark Tank bump, and they definitely saw that. But the real test of a founder and a startup that ends up on Shark Tank is what their company does months and even years after their episode airs on the tank. Now, let me talk about the biggest hurdle that both of these startups faced. Now, remember, one was in the alcohol space and one was in the office supply space, but both of them had to figure out the best option for production. In a lower margin product like alcohol and office supplies, anywhere between a 1 to 2% increase could be huge for your profits and your bottom line, and it really adds up as you begin to scale. Now, Beatbox Beverage was able to find a manufacturer that could produce their drinks with the same quality, the right pricing, and was able to scale their business as they grew more distribution across the country and ultimately across the globe. Now, for MC Squares, they took a completely different approach. They started to see not only demand from consumers, but also big box retailers were reaching out to them wanting to put their products inside of their stores, which meant there was massive opportunities for scale, but it also meant that they needed massive amounts of cash and money that would need to be up front before these orders were placed, which puts any kind of business, if Target or Walmart or Costco, any of these big box retailers order a product from a startup, it puts them in an immediate cash crunch because they're not paying out for maybe another 60, 90, even 100 plus days. And for startups, even in some of the earliest stages, when they find themselves in that wild dilemma of big orders coming, but not enough cash to be able to float along the way, sometimes it's too much for them to be able to handle it, and ultimately it ends up closing their doors for good. I found that at times the margin between success over here and defeat over here is way closer than you will ever realize as the consumer. What amazes me is that when you hear the stories from founders of some of the most iconic brands that you've ever bought and shopped at and that you know of, they will often tell the stories of how their credit cards were maxed out and how they were 1 day or 2 days away from shutting down, and then some sort of lucky break happens and boom, their company takes off. But it was that moment where they could have succeeded or failed, and the margins on startups sometimes are just that razor thin. So one of the other takeaways from these two startups is both that they had consumable products, but one of them had a much faster repurchase rate. So let's talk about Beatbox Beverage. Now, if someone buys and drinks their product, well, there comes another weekend right around the corner, right? Where a consumer can go out, back again, buy an entire new case of their alcohol brand and consume it for that weekend's partying and having fun. Now, for office products at MC Squares, their products, some of them were consumables and they needed to be replenished, but not nearly as quickly as a consumer of an alcohol brand brand could. So their average order tickets had to be much, much higher for them to succeed and find light on the other side. I am friends with the founders of both of these startups. I am one of their biggest fans and have championed them since the day that I invested in them. I am proud of both of them and proud to be an investor in both of them. Yes, one is on a rocket ride and could soon be worth $1 billion. But even for MC Squares, I have no regrets as an investor. Their founder is a world-class dude and he fought every single step of the way. The part that's so inspiring to me is while they're currently in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, he isn't giving up. He's going to find a way to restructure and head back out into the market for the fight to see this company do what he had a vision to do and ultimately at the end of the day, return money to investors. And this is a great example of why investing in the right founder is so critical and so important. It is virtually impossible to know how each startup is going to end up. You do the due diligence, you invest in great founders, and you support them along the way. But there are always market conditions and factors and economies and surprises that come up along the way that they're able to sometimes weather and overcome, and sometimes it's insurmountable and they have to either go into bankruptcy, restructure, or ultimately close their doors for good. Shark Tank has been around for 15 years, but it's time, I believe, for the people to finally have a voice inside of the tank. And for years, we've all watched and we've enjoyed the sharks battling it out with the startup founders. One of the coolest things ever. Those of us watching Shark Tank could only do that. Just watch. Until the laws changed in 2016 that made it possible for non-rich investors, everyday investors like you and me, to start jumping into startups just like the sharks. And that is why I thought it was so exciting to invest in two startups right alongside my heroes, honestly, Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary. But I want to know from you, what Shark Tank product did you see come through the tank that you wish you could have invested alongside your favorite shark? Drop it in the comments. I would love to know all about it. And hey, look, if this is the first time you've ever heard of the world of startup investing and how everyday people, because of the laws that changed in 2016, can become a startup investor, well, don't worry. I've put together a masterclass for you, breaking it all down. Inside this masterclass, I'm going to talk about the laws and legislation that made it possible for you to become a startup investor. I'm going to share the key factors that I look for when doing diligence on startups. And I'm also going to talk about the red flags that I avoid. And when I see them, I run away. And ultimately, I'm going to share how you can invest in startups right alongside me. It's completely and totally free. The link is down in the description. Come check out the masterclass and I will see you there. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I know you're going to love this one right here. And you're definitely going to love this one right here.